everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy that you all made it despite the weather outside. As you've noted with the title, today I'm going to try and tell you about some theoretical connections between these seemingly different fields of convex optimization and active learning. Broadly, my talk will be in 4 parts. So in the first part, I'll just introduce the models for optimization and for active learning. So it's called the stochastic oracle models. And so that's going to be a basic introduction thing. Everyone should kind of get that. In the second part, I'm going to give you some intuitive connections as to why they should be connected, why there should be some connection between the two fields. And that should also be pretty easy to follow. Then as we get into the third and fourth parts, I'm going to try and make this, the intuition a little more formal and mathematical. And so I guess the second half of the talk is going to be a little more rigorous. And so that's where I advise falling asleep. But the first half, we should all be together. So I'll get started. The first thing to notice about both these fields is there's an inherent role of feedback. So let's look at convex optimization first. So let's look at it in one dimension. So you have a function f of x, and you have this domain x. There's some point x star which is the optimum, and your goal is to identify that x star. So you basically query at some point, you get some information. You query at another point, get some information, and so on. So you query at a bunch of points, and sometimes you might overshoot and go to the other side. But hopefully in the end, the aim is through a bunch of queries. I'll formalize what kind of queries you're allowed to make. But through a bunch of queries, your aim is to try and identify the point x star. Right? So that's what our aim is. And this entire field theoretically tries to study how do we minimize the information required to find x star? How do we minimize the query complexity or the number of queries we need to identify this point x star? Right? So that's going to be like denoted by t as the number of time steps in this optimization procedure. Now, what about active threshold learning? So the particular type of active learning I'll be talking about is active threshold learning. So in that we have, again, we have a one-dimensional domain, x, and we have this function probability that y is like a red positive dot given x, and it's going to look something like this. What this means is that if I query at a point at this left end with probability 0, I'm going to get a red dot, which means I'll get a blue dot basically. So basically at this end, I'm going to get a blue dot. At this end, it's probability 1 of getting a red dot. And this is the way that the probability varies. So this is called a threshold. So you have a threshold, and to the left of the threshold, you're more likely to see one kind of label, and to the right of the threshold, you're more likely to see the other kind of label. And our task in active threshold learning is to query at different points in this interval and try and figure out where this threshold is. So maybe you query at the 2 endpoints, figure out it's blue and red. You query somewhere in the middle, you find it's a blue. But then you might query on the opposite side of the threshold and you might still get a blue. And that's because the probability of seeing a red here is not 1, it's like 0.7 or something like that. So you might, because of the form of this function, you might get the wrong label, even if you're on the right side of the threshold, you might get the opposite label. But the hope is that eventually, you'll keep querying on this side, you'll figure out kind of most of the labels seem to be red here, most of the labels seem to be blue there. Again, you might be on the other side of the threshold and get an opposite label, but hopefully, you'll figure out what this point x star is. And again, the role of feedback is basically the same. You make queries, you get observations in both these models. And based on these observations, you decide where to query next. And again, the way we analyze active learning algorithms is to talk about sample complexity. You want to minimize the number of queries needed to find this decision boundary. So you don't want to spend like 20,000 queries finding that point. You'd like to be intelligent and find it well, even if your queries are noisy. Okay, so broadly, you can already see that there's a sequential mechanism in both of them, and there's this role of feedback that all my past information determines my next point that I query at. So the formal model for stochastic convex optimization, it's like I'm going to be talking about first order stochastic convex optimization, is basically you have a curious person who's querying at different points. Okay, so DD queries at a point x1 on the domain, and Dumbledore, the oracle, he knows what f is, like DD doesn't, but Dumbledore does. And Dumbledore gives back the function at that point and the gradient at that point, right? So he gives back f of x and g of x. The only thing is that he doesn't actually give it back noiselessly, he gives it back with noise. So he gives back f hat such that the expected value of f hat is f, and he gives back g hat such that the expected value of g hat is g. So g is just the gradient of f. So it's called the first order oracle model because you're getting first order information back. You're getting the function and you're getting the gradient, right? So you get unbiased estimates, but they're noisy. So it could be like, you could add zero mean Gaussian noise and return it. And there are many other ways you can think about this, but basically it's noisy. And then DD, based on this information, decides where to query next at x2, gets back some noisy but unbiased information in return. And so she does this, whatever, t times or n times, and at the end of all these queries, she gives 1 point as her final guess. She's like, okay, based on all these queries, I think that the minimum is somewhere here. And we're going to evaluate how well she can identify the minimum in t queries or n queries. So this is the model for stochastic convex optimization. Are there any questions here? This is kind of crucial. So if there are any questions, you should stop me. The active learning the oracle model is pretty similar. So you query at a point x1, and the oracle returns you the label of that point, like is it red or is it blue. So you get back a label which is 0 or 1, red or blue, whichever way you want to think about it. But you don't get back always the true label. You get back the label such that it's unbiased, such that the expected value of y given x is actually the probability that y is actually equal to 1 given x. So you won't actually get the right label every time. There's some noise like in the previous case, but it's kind of unbiased in some sense. So then again you query it x2, you get back y2 and so on. And after n queries, basically DD's job is to say, okay, I've made all these queries, I got all these labels, and this is my guess for where the threshold is. Right? So does anyone have any questions about both the setups, the formal setup for optimization and the formal setup for active learning? Okay. So this is going to be the most important 2 slides of the talk, so please pay attention. The Quiznos can stop for a second. Okay. I want to look at the noiseless setting first and convince you that there's something going on in the noiseless setting. There's a very intuitive connection in noiseless setting. So in the noiseless setting, you have this function f, and when you query at a point, you get exactly f of x and you get exactly g of x. And in active learning, what I mean by a noiseless setting is the probability before the threshold is 0 and the probability after the threshold is 1. So every single point on the left, you'll always get the right label, and every single point on the right, you'll always get the right label. So this is what I call the noiseless setting. This should be the easiest setting to analyze, right? So what happens in the optimization setting is if you look at the sign of the gradient on both sides, the sign of the gradient actually looks like this. So when I'm over here or here or here or here, the gradient is actually positive, and so the sign of the gradient, you can think of that as the 1. And when I'm on the other side, the gradient is negative, and so basically the sign of the gradient, you can think of that as a 0. So when I'm in the noiseless setting, any point on the left has a negative gradient, you can think of that as a 0, and any point on the right has a positive gradient, and you can think of that as a 1, right? So essentially, what I can do in this setting is just query points, and based on just the sign of the gradient, I can decide, okay, that's a negative label, that's a positive label, and I can try and do a kind of binary search to identify the threshold, which is what you'd imagine doing over here. You query at the 2 endpoints, you're like, okay, that's blue, that's red, let me query at the midpoint, that might be blue or red, and then you keep trying to cut the interval in half, and so you'd do a binary search if it was completely noiseless like this, and you'd identify the optimum point exponentially fast. And you can do this in the noiseless setting here also, just looking at the sign of the gradient. So broadly, intuitively, the connection is that the probability of y being a red dot given x in this model is exactly the same as the probability that the sign of the gradient is positive given x in this model. Okay, this is like the most important slide, and if you can take this away from here, then that would be awesome. Right, any questions about this? Do you believe me? Yes.
So in convex optimization, you also have the magnitude of the gradient, right?
You do, and I'm saying that this is enough, right? I'm saying that
I could do a convex optimization faster by using the magnitude. But
yeah, so you could imagine that maybe because you have more information, you also have the magnitude, you could do it faster. But I'll actually show you that the rates are exactly the same. So that will come up later. But at least intuitively, if you just use the sign of the gradient, there's a clear connection between the two. Right, so this is the noiseless setting. What about the noisy setting? So the noisy setting, you don't get exact f values, you get like slightly perturbed f and g values. And similarly over here, it's not a jump, it smoothly varies, and so you're going to get some noisy queries. But the intuition actually just still carries over in this case also. And if you look at, if you try and calculate what's the probability that the sign is positive given x, you'll see that if I'm querying at a point really far away and the magnitude of the gradient is really large, then with very high probability I'll get a plus sign. I'll have to add a very large noise if I'm going to get a negative sign. If you look at the optimum point here, the gradient is 0. If I'm adding unbiased noise when the gradient is 0, I'm equally likely to get a positive or a negative. And so the probability that the sign is a plus is basically 0.5 because it could be plus or minus with equal probability at the optimum. And similarly at the other side, when the gradient is large negative quantity, I'm going to have to add a very large Gaussian noise or whatever in order to flip the sign. And so again, with very high probability tending to 0, you're going to get the label as negative. So basically the probability looks very much like this, and that's pretty much the generalization in active learning also. And so the same intuition actually carries through, that the probability that y is a red dot over here given x looks pretty much like the probability that sine of g hat of x is plus given x. So I've not mathematically formalized it, but I think this should be intuitively clear that when I add noise, it starts to look like this, and it's pretty similar. Yes?
Do you have a generalization for the multi-class case?
Oh no. So we're going to stick to convex optimization, active threshold learning. Okay, so the two most important slides of the talk, are we all good? Okay, so I guess we can go back to the quiz notes. Okay, so when does active learning help, right? So you might want to ask the question like, okay, I've seen these noisy things, when it's a jump it seems to help. So consider two cases, one in which the probability of y being a red dot given x looks like a jump, and the other case in which it looks extremely flat. So around the optimum point it looks really, really flat. The problem is when it's extremely flat, as you can imagine, suppose, think of the most extreme case when this is actually literally flat. It's like there's a really, really small gradient perhaps, so it's like 0.49 at one end and 0.51 at the other end, and it's just like it's nearly flat. The problem in that setting is that no matter where you query, you have basically a 50-50 chance of getting a plus or minus label, right? So you're going to be trying to intelligently query at points, but at every point you query, you basically have a 50-50 chance of getting a plus or minus label. It's going to be almost impossible to try and identify this point where it's 0.5 rather than 0.51 or 0.49. So when it's really flat around that point, it's hard. On the other hand, when there's a jump of this form, that's actually easy. You do binary search basically. You're sure that you'll get noiseless labels on this side, noiseless labels on this side, so you can really quickly identify the optimum. So how do we mathematically characterize this? That was done by Sibakov in some of his work. Okay, so we know that flatter is harder, and basically if we ignore the shape, that is, if we did not take the shape into account, we'd basically be doing random sampling or passive learning. We'd just be like randomly sampling points and getting it. So the base case should be passive learning. You can't do worse than passive learning. You can just randomly sample points and do passive learning. But how do we try and characterize how the rate depends on the behavior of the function around the optimum? Right? So as I said, if you have a jump, you do a binary search, you can do it exponentially fast. If you're flat, then there are no intelligent queries and you're basically doing passive learning. And the way you characterize this is by trying to talk about the shape of the function around half. So if you look at this p of y equal to red dot given x minus half, so if you look at that, and we say that if it grows as fast as some quantity, okay, so this is going to be just some constant lambda, and this looks like x minus x star to some power. So x minus x star is the distance from the optimum. So this just means that as I move away from the optimum, how does my function grow? So this is exactly what this is trying to capture. When kappa is 1, this exponent kappa is 1, this power becomes 0. So this term basically doesn't matter. And what this is trying to capture is that on one side it's at least half plus lambda, and on the other side it's at most half minus lambda. So you basically have a jump, one side half plus lambda, one side half minus lambda. So you have a jump of size 2 lambda at least. And when kappa tends to infinity in this case, basically it gets arbitrarily flat. So you'll get some, when x minus x star is really small, you're looking at points close to the decision boundary. Then this will look like 0.1 to the infinity, which will basically be like 0. And so this looks really, really flat. So basically this exponent, this exponent tries to capture how the function behaves around the 0. And when the exponent is 1, you can do it really well. When it's infinity, you can't really do much. And this is called the Sibukov noise condition. And it's very popular in active learning, even in regression, active regression. It actually comes up in level set estimation, comes up all over the place. In order to be able to characterize the rate of growth, we're going to try and characterize that according to this exponent kappa. Right? So that exponent is going to be important. And clearly the rate depends on whether the exponent is small or large. Right? So active learning helps basically when kappa is small. When kappa is really large, you're basically doing like passive learning. Okay, any questions about this? No. Okay. So that form is important, so just try and remember that. So I'm going to talk about the minimax active learning rates in one dimension. So if this function actually satisfies the Sibukov noise condition for some value of kappa, okay, so over here it looks like the value of kappa would be something like 2, because it grows approximately linearly around 0.5. So if you look at just that rate of growth there, it looks like a linear growth. So the exponent is something like 2. Then we know that the minimax optimal active learning rate, it can be measured in 2 ways. One way is measure the point error, that is my final guess, how far away from the optimum is that, in some norm. Like if I'm doing it in one dimension, this is just absolute value. So the absolute difference between x hat n and x star, it's going to grow like n to the minus 1 by 2k minus 2. Okay, so you don't really need to remember that form, but intuitively if you see that as k tends to infinity, the denominator tends to infinity, so 1 by infinity is 0, n to the minus 0 is a constant. And so what this is trying to say is that when k is going to infinity, you're going to make a constant error. Okay, so when k is going to infinity, it's getting arbitrarily flat, and you're never going to be able to identify where that optimum is. On the other hand, when k is 1, right, which is the best case, which is a jump, you can see that this denominator tends to 0, and this is like n to the minus infinity, which is exponentially fast. You should think of it as exponentially fast, and you can identify the optimum basically exponentially fast. So that's what the point error rate looks like. If this is classification, so if you consider the 0-1 loss for classification, and if this function is basically like smooth, like Lipschitz smooth or something like that, then you can say that the excess risk of the classifier at x hat n, which is your guess, and the true Bayes optimal classifier at x star, the excess risk grows like n to the minus k by 2k minus 2. Okay, so I mean again the exact form of that isn't important. It's just that again when you can see the two cases, what happens when k is 1 and k goes to infinity. But this is what the rates look like with k. Does anyone have any questions as to, at least intuitively, something like this should make sense. K is small, awesome. K is large, I'm screwed. So this was proved in Castro and Novak's paper, Minimax Bound for Active Learning from 2007, Colt 2007. Okay. When k is equal to 2, I'm going to talk about that as a special case for some reason, because we'll see that this is connected to strongly convex functions. And when k is equal to 2, this rate looks like n to the minus half, and this rate looks like n to the minus 1. And we'll see that for strongly convex functions, which will correspond to k equal to 2, the point error actually grows like n to the minus half, and the excess function error, that is f of x hat n minus f of x star grows like n to the minus 1. So we'll see this coming up again in the next couple of slides. Right. So as I said, this Sivakov noise condition is going to be related to strong convexity, and basically my claim is that strong convexity is exactly Sivakov noise condition with k equal to 2. Right. So what is strong convexity? I mean, hopefully some of you have seen this before. So it just says that f of y is at least f of x plus the gradient at x times y minus x plus lambda times x minus y the whole squared. If you know convexity, so the first part of it is just that's the definition of convexity. If you're saying something strongly convex, then you have this additional x minus y the whole squared term saying that not only do I know it's convex, but it's convex by a certain amount growing like a squared term. Okay, so that's what you mean by strong convexity. And a clear implication of strong convexity is if you put x as x star, so you put this term as the optimum x star, the gradient at x star is 0, so this term drops out, and what you get is something like f of x minus f of x star is at least this term, lambda times x minus x star the whole square. Okay, so just putting one point as x star, you get some, and you get an equation like this, and this looks extremely similar to the Sivakov noise condition, right? I mean, the Sivakov noise condition was exactly the probability of y equal to 1 given x minus half grows at least like lambda times x minus x star the whole to the kappa minus 1. And we'll see that the gradient actually satisfies something like this. So quite an immediate implication of this, it's not differentiation, but I can prove it otherwise, that if you kind of intuitively take x minus x star to the other side, it turns out that the gradient of x satisfies the Sivakov noise condition very much like this. So our intuition about the gradient being very much like the probability of y equal to 1 given x is like exactly captured over here, because the gradient satisfies something exactly like a Sivakov noise condition, right? And we can show that basically if the noise PDF is not like fat-tailed or something like that, it's not skewed, and it's basically unbiased noise that you're at, then the probability that so the true gradient satisfies something like this, and you can show that the noisy gradient, the probability that its sign is positive, also satisfies something like this, basically. And when k is 2, this is like 2 minus 1, like kappa minus 1, you get something of this sort. Yep.
Sorry, I probably missed this. How do you define the sign of a gradient in higher dimensions?
So think of it now as 1D. All I'm doing is one-dimensionally trying to relate.
So why does the notation up there have norms?
Yeah, so this is I will generalize it to higher dimensions, but here you can see like you can take the norm of the gradient for this thing, but in one dimension you should. Right now I'm just trying to clarify what the formalize the connection in one dimension between convex optimization and machine learning.
The statement here is still one-dimensional. Your last statement is more one-dimensional.
Yeah. I'll move to higher later on, but right now this is all one-dimensional. Any other questions? This page should kind of convince you that I can start with the definition of strong convexity and basically get something that looks exactly like this Sivakov noise condition. Now this automatically means that the rates are going to look very much like the rates we got from the Sivakov noise condition. And what do we get? We get that we actually have an algorithmic reduction from convex optimization to active learning. You can use an active learning subroutine to do convex optimization, and you just, any active learning routine that's optimal, for that specific exponent, but optimal in general, and many such algorithms are known. And if the function is strongly convex with Lipschitz gradients, then you basically get the point error to look like t to the minus half, and the excess function error to look like t to the minus 1. And this is known to be optimal for strongly convex functions. So this paper in 2010 by Agarwal, Bartlett, Ravikumar and Wainwright basically, and work from earlier also kind of shows that this is the optimal point error rate and function error rate for strongly convex functions. And you get that rate by a reduction to active learning through this Sivakov noise condition connection. Any questions? So yes, so that raises the obvious question about what about d dimensions, what happens. So the hope that convex optimization in d dimensions is connected to active learning in d dimensions is not true. And the reason is because in general, when you're trying to do active learning in d dimensions, you're trying to learn a d-1 dimensional decision boundary. So there's some region in which it's positive, another region which is negative, and you're trying to actually find an entire boundary which separates the positive from the negative labels. And the thing is, in d dimensions, convex optimization is still the same. You're still searching for one point. You're not searching for any boundary or something. You're searching for one point, which is a zero-dimensional object. So somehow, when you go to d dimensions, their aims are kind of different. But what we'll see is actually that d-dimensional convex optimization also behaves like one-dimensional active learning. So it doesn't behave like d-dimensional active learning, but it still behaves like one-dimensional active learning. And that's pretty cool. So as we'll see, the complexity of convex optimization in any dimension is the same as the complexity of active learning in one dimension. Basically because the aims are the same. You're trying to learn a point in both these settings. So we do have an algorithmic reduction in d dimensions, like for strongly convex functions, and it's actually just a simple randomized coordinate descent procedure. For a certain number of, so you divide your entire time period. So you're doing convex optimization on a strongly convex function. You have t time steps. You divide your time steps into what are called epochs, into like blocks, and the number of epochs looks like some dependence on dimension and log t. This is just really for the proof to go through with high probability. You couldn't drop a log t factor if you wanted it to go through with expectation only. And then the algorithm is just really simple. You just choose a coordinate at random, and so now you're looking only at that one dimension, and you do active learning along that coordinate for only a fraction of the time steps. So you don't do it for t time steps. You do it for t by e time steps, right? So you just for one block, you move along one direction. You choose a new direction, you move along that block for some block of time. Choose a third direction, keep doing that. So basically, you're just doing random coordinate descent, but at each step, instead of doing coordinate descent using like gradient descent or something like that, you use active learning for that smaller time period. And then you can show that basically this actually gives you the right rates. So even in higher dimensions, it gives you for strongly convex functions the rate of t to the minus half or t to the minus 1 for point error or function error.
So what's the handle E there?
E is like, that's like the number of epochs. So we call it like you divide your total number of time steps into blocks. Epochs is just like a fancy name for blocks. And in each block you choose a coordinate and you do active learning along that coordinate. Then you choose another coordinate, do active learning along that coordinate, and that's the number of times you choose a coordinate and do active learning. It's just the number of blocks, right?
So you sweep over all the coordinates, right?
Yeah, except that you don't have to actually sweep over them, you just choose them at random and that works. Right? This will work with high probability. Any questions? So this is basically a reduction from d-dimensional stochastic convex optimization to one-dimensional active learning. If you have a black box to do 1D active learning, you can do this at the optimal rate. Okay. So moving to the third part of the talk. Now I'm going to try and generalize this. I talked about strongly convex functions, which was like k equal to 2. But what about general k? Like I have this Sibikov noise condition for general k, and I would like to prove upper and lower bounds to actually convince you that the rates that I get are actually tight, right? And you get these rates like t to the minus k by 2k minus 2, and that's for active learning. Can you do something like that for convex optimization? It turns out that you can. It's just that over here, this, like what we wrote down for strongly convex functions, we had f of x minus f of x star is at least lambda times x minus x star the whole squared, and you can just, what if it was just like to the power kappa for a general kappa, and then you'd get that g of x minus g of x star, because g of x star is 0. So g of x, the norm of g of x is at least lambda times x minus x star to the k minus 1. So you can show this quite easily. And what are called uniformly convex functions satisfy such conditions. So just like it's just a generalization of strongly convex functions. There's no reason that that you said, okay, I have this definition of convexity and it's convex by at least x minus y the whole squared. There's no reason you need to only consider the whole squared. You could consider the whole to the power k, okay, for a general k. And many such functions do satisfy things like this. for other case. So for example, when you regularize with the 2 norm squared, your net function becomes strongly convex. But if you chose to regularize with a different norm, like the k norm to the power k, then your function would not be strongly convex, it would be uniformly convex with exponent k. So you can, you can easily construct such functions by in just regression, but using a different regularizer, like the k norm to the power k. And you'd like to know, if you imposed a different regularizer, how much harder is the problem now to optimize? Right? Ultimately, you have an optimization problem which you have to solve quickly, and you'd like to be able to characterize how quickly you can optimize such functions. And so if, just as in the previous case, if the function is uniformly convex with a general exponent k, you should just think of this as strong convexity basically with just a different exponent. Then it's going to satisfy a Sibukov noise condition kind of thing with an exponent k minus 1 instead of 1 over there or 2 over there. Right? So it's just easy to generalize the definition of strong convexity, and such functions have been studied in the literature. Right? So the thing to notice is that this condition of uniform convexity is required to hold everywhere in the domain. Right? So this is for all points x and y in the domain, but such a condition just needs to hold around the point x star. So every point with respect to x star needs to grow at a particular rate. So but x and y need not be connected as long as x grows at a rate according to x star and y grows at a rate according to x star. So this is kind of a weaker condition in some sense than this, because it doesn't need to hold everywhere. And this implies this, like the lower one implies the upper one. Okay. So what are the minimax stochastic convex optimization rates? So if the TNC for convex functions does hold, then that is a condition like this actually holds. And if the function is Lipschitz, then you always optimize over a bounded set because the rate depends on the diameter of the set that you're optimizing over. Then you basically, we are able to show that the point error grows like exactly like the even in d dimensions, it grows like the one-dimensional rate for active learning, like e to the minus 1 by 2k minus 2. And the excess function, the function error, which is your point minus the true optimum point, that grows like e to the minus k by 2k minus 2, which is exactly how the excess risk grew in active learning. And this is true even in d dimensions. So the dependence on d is a polynomial factor, it doesn't come into the exponent anywhere. So the rate according to t still remains the same. Any doubts? These are precisely the rates for 1D active learning. And you can just putting k equal to 2, you can see some rates. As k goes to infinity, you basically come back to convex function rates. And when k is 3 by 2, you get some rates. So you can just plug in some numbers to see that what these rates broadly look like. So how does one prove lower bounds for stochastic convex optimization, right? So in general, proving lower bounds is hard, and convex optimization lower bounds are especially hard. But I'll try and just recap in 2 slides the intuition behind the lower bound. Okay, so what we want to show is something like this. We want to show that this is soup over all oracles. So you don't want to make any assumption about the oracle. It could be adding Gaussian noise, it could be adding Bernoulli noise, it could be adding whatever kind of noise it wants. So the worst kind of oracle, as long as it gives you unbiased noise. Soup over all sets, so it's the worst case set, okay, but you know that set. Inf over all x hat, so this means basically this is the infimum over all algorithms that return a point at the end. And soup over all functions in your function class, which is like Lipschitz functions which are strongly convex. You want to show that this is called the minimax rate basically. It's normally only written as inf soup, but you're also taking soup over oracles and sets. This is like, it's a technicality, but broadly this is the minimax rate, and you want to show that the minimax point error grows at least as fast as, that's the standard omega, grows at least as fast as t to the minus 1 by 2k minus 2. So this is a minimax lower bound. I'm hoping people are familiar with this. This is what we like to show. So what we do show is we'll show for a particular oracle and for a particular set that this kind of a thing holds true. And so if you take soup over oracles and soup over sets, it can only be larger. So we choose a particular set, which is it's just like a d-dimensional hypercube intersected with a sphere. It doesn't really matter what the form is. We choose some set. We choose some oracle which adds Gaussian noise of variance sigma squared to both the function and its gradient. So we are allowed to choose S star and O star. And we have to demonstrate that with this S star and with this O star, convex optimization is hard. Okay? And I'm going to show you that convex optimization is hard by constructing two functions that are going to be very difficult to distinguish in T queries. Okay, so the first function looks basically like, it looks like kappa norm to the kappa. That's basically what the function looks like. You can multiply it by constant if you want to. So the first function looks like this. It's only in the positive quadrant, so I'm only going to draw that part of it. There's this other function which I construct. It's kind of hard to parse, so I'll show you what we did. The first thing is we shift the center by 2a. So in all coordinates, the minimum is the same except for one in which it's shifted by 2a. Then we add a constant, and we let that hold only for a particular range of the domain, and for the rest of it, it matches f0 of x. So this is just technicalities. Broadly, what we're trying to do is construct two extremely similar functions, f0 and f1, and show that with T queries, you're not going to be able to differentiate which of the two functions is the one chosen by the oracle, and hence you'll make a mistake in the optimum. Ultimately, your aim is to output the optimum of the function. If the chosen function was f0, you'd like to output all zeros, and if the chosen function was f1, you'd like to output 2a 0 0 0 as your final guess. But with T queries, I'm going to show you that it's going to be very hard for you to differentiate between is it f0 or is it f1, since you have noisy queries. So if it was noiseless, it would be much easier. But with noisy queries, you're not going to be able to. So how do you show that it's hard? You basically, you look at the probability distributions generated by your set of points. So xi's are the points that you query at. f0 of xi is the function values, g0 of xi is the gradients. So if the true model was 0, this is the probability distribution. And if the true model was 1, this is the probability distribution. And I'm going to use something called Fano's inequality, which shows basically what Fano's inequality says is that if the KL divergence between these two distributions is bounded above by a constant, that is, it's hard to distinguish, they don't differ much, like KL divergence is small, then the minimax error is bounded below by a constant. So that's basically what Fano's inequality says. It's a standard inequality from information theory. And what we get in our case is that the KL divergence between P0 and P1 can be, it looks like something like G0 minus G1 the whole square, F0 minus F1 the whole square. And if you just try and calculate what it is, then you can show that it's actually bounded by a constant if you choose A to be t to the minus 1 by 2k minus 2. This idea was basically borrowed from Castro Novak in 07. They had a very similar argument for active learning. So they proved lower bounds for active learning by constructing two very similar thresholds that are very hard to distinguish. And we basically use the same proof idea and use two functions that are very hard to distinguish to get rates. So this connection between the two fields was not just happy theory, but it actually helped us port a proof from one field, which is active learning, into a proof from the other field. So we have lower bounds for stochastic convex optimization, which are just borrowed using techniques from active learning. The technicalities, again, they're not that important. But this actually yields other things for free as well. It actually yields what are called zeroth order lower bounds as well. So we were working with first order oracles, which gives you gradient information. So zeroth order oracles don't give you gradient information, they only give you noisy function values. And so you can ask, okay, if I only got noisy function values, what does my error rate look like? It's just that this term drops out and you only have this term left, and it turns out that you get it pretty trivially to be t to the minus 1 by 2k. So this exact same proof flips through immediately. You get zeroth order oracle lower bounds, and you get lower bounds for uniformly convex functions. So it's kind of one single proof that gets you strongly convex lower bounds as well as pretty much for any k in the zeroth and first order oracle cases. And to show that those lower bounds are tight, we'd like to basically demonstrate that there's an algorithm that achieves those exact lower bounds. So you demonstrate an upper bound that achieves the lower bounds, and hence both the upper and lower bounds have to be tight. And we do that by basically demonstrating an algorithm that's called epoch gradient descent. It's very similar to this epoch randomized coordinate descent that I described. You basically divide your total number of time steps into epochs, and TE is like the time step per epoch. And within every block, you do some kind of projected gradient descent. So you divide your time step into blocks, and in each block you do projected gradient descent. The difference is that at every block you change what's the in what region you're doing the projected gradient descent. So you shrink the region by half, by some factor every time. So you change the radius of the region that you work in, and you change the step size for projected gradient descent. So you're working in these blocks, but two blocks differ in the shrinking of the radius and shrinking of the step size. And you spend double the amount of time as the previous block. So you just, in the next epoch, you spend 2 times the previous epoch. So this is just, this is again, the reason it looks this complicated is because it needed to work out, the math needed to work out. And so we found that appropriately setting these step sizes works. But idea-wise, the algorithm is just projected gradient descent in blocks, where you just change your step sizes in each block. Okay. And you can show that you can prove upper bounds. It's there in our paper that the point error and the function error look exactly like this form. The interesting thing is actually in convex optimization, nobody looks at point error, or rather it's normally extremely difficult to prove anything about point error. It's much easier to prove something about function error. And so we are able to get both lower and upper bounds for function and point error kind of simultaneously, which is kind of not seen in the literature before. Clearly the problem over here is that we need to know k, right? So if I have a function, I need to know k. Similarly in the active learning problem, I really need to know what the slope is of the function around the threshold. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to do active learning. But given an active learning problem, you're just going to be querying at points. Nobody's going to tell you that the slope looks like k equal to 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. So you don't actually have the information of what the slope looks like. And similarly for when you're doing optimization, especially in the Oracle model, you're just querying at points and getting back values. Nobody's telling you what this k is. And this algorithm for achieving the tight bounds needs to know k. So the obvious next step is to ask, can we, for both the active learning setting and the convex optimization setting, can we describe algorithms that are adaptive to k? That is, I don't tell you k, but you get the right rate as if you knew k, right? So that's what you call an adaptive algorithm. So nobody tells you what k is, but your algorithm is intelligent enough that it somehow gets the right rate as if it knew k in the first place. That's an adaptive algorithm, and that's basically what we'd like to describe next. But life is hard, and I guess it's frustrating. And this part is going to get a little technical. So yes, basically we want to adapt to the degree of uniform convexity. Now it turns out that Yuditsky and Nesterov in 2010 published an algorithm in convex optimization that does this. Okay, so we didn't do this; they did it in convex optimization. They published a dual averaging procedure. Doesn't matter what that is. You can think of it as a gradient descent procedure that actually is adaptive to the exponent k for uniformly convex functions. So they published such an algorithm. The algorithm is, it's again broadly exactly the same thing. It's epoch-based gradient descent. You divide your total number of time steps into blocks, and within each block you run any optimization procedure that's optimal for convex functions. So you just ignore k and assume that the function is just convex, like just 2 gradient descent or dual averaging or any such function within each epoch for the smaller block number of time steps, and then you shrink the radius by half and you repeat this procedure. So the algorithm is still very simple. It's just epoch gradient descent. It's their analysis that was extremely interesting, and broadly the idea behind their analysis was based on the idea that I'm not going to be able to identify a particular epoch for you. So I have capital E blocks or epochs, and I'm not going to tell you which epoch it is, but I can prove to you that there will exist an epoch, there will exist some epoch E bar, a special round, in which the optimum of that round and my final guess are actually like very close by. So I'm actually very close to the optimum, and that the optimum in that round is actually the overall optimum. So I won't be able to tell you what this E bar is, but I can guarantee that at some stage in the algorithm for some epoch over here, I'm going to come very close to the optimum. And then basically, I'll just skip this for now. What they then show is that for every epoch after that, so at some epoch you get very close to the optimum, and for every epoch after that you don't stray much from the optimum. So You basically hit it at some point and then you can't move much. And the reason that that happens is because you're shrinking the radius by 2 at every time step. So at every time step, the amount of wiggle room that you're giving the point is continuously shrinking. So like for example, initially you'd start off with the entire R1 and you'd be searching in this region. Then you'd shrink it to some region R2. Then you'd shrink it to some region RE bar. And so basically there's going to exist an E bar such that I'm very close to the optimum. And after this E bar, I have very little wiggle room. So even if I try and move away from the optimum, I can't move very far away. I'm doing projected gradient descent or something, so I'm only going to be within this region. So even if I sort of move away from the optimum, it can't move too far away because the radius is shrinking so fast. So it was a very clever trick to say that I'm not going to identify the time point at which you're going to get close to the optimum, but I'm going to show two things. You're going to get close to optimum at some point, and after that point, you're never going to move too far away from it. And so that was a very interesting proof technique by them. And the cool thing is, because of this connection between uniformly convex functions and active learning of thresholds using the Sibikov noise condition, we were able to basically port the same algorithm for doing adaptive active learning. So if you didn't know for the P of y equal to red given x, if you didn't know the slope around 0.5 and you want to be adaptive to that, we basically have exactly the same idea we borrowed from a convex optimization problem, and we have the same algorithm. You divide it into time steps, into blocks. In the optimization algorithm, you were doing just something like gradient descent in each block, and over here what we'll do is we just do passive learning. We just ignore k and we do passive learning in each block for how many ever time periods, and then we shrink the radius in which we are searching and move on. Right? So it's block based, and in each block I do passive learning. And again, you can show basically the same thing, that there is going to be some block in which I get very close to identifying the threshold, and basically at every epoch after that, I don't move too far away from the threshold. And the key points in the proof are, they look something like this. I mean, you have the excess risk of your point with respect to the true point. Because you're doing passive learning, it's going to look like the radius by root b, it's at most radius by root b. So this is just a guarantee provided by any passive learning procedures that the excess risk is bounded by RE by root b. And we know by the Sibikov noise condition that you can show that this is actually at least x minus x star to the k. So using these two things basically in the proof is a little, more convoluted, but in the convex optimization setting, what they used was f of x minus f of x star. If you're doing a convex optimization procedure, it's going to be r by root t, and if it's uniformly convex, then it's at least x minus x star to the k. So in the convex optimization setting, this was f of x minus f of x star. Here it's risk of x minus risk of x star. And so essentially the same proof works, the same algorithm works, and this is the first algorithm that is adaptive to k. So up till now, algorithms have been known that that if you knew k, you'd be able to get the right rate. But this is the first algorithm that is adaptive to k. So it'll get you the right rate even if you don't know k. And it's much simpler than Haneke's algorithm. Haneke has an algorithm in a different setting, in what's called a pool-based setting, in which you're allowed to query at only a particular set of points. So there are some unknown points and you're allowed to query for those labels. Here we're in a setting where you can query anywhere in the domain, you can query at any point. But Haneke has an extremely complicated algorithm involving disagreement coefficients and version spaces that does this in a different setting. But we have actually quite a really simple, this is an extremely simple algorithm to describe. The proof is complicated, and you want that. You want a simple algorithm with a complex proof rather than the other way around. And the algorithm is really simple. Just break it up into epochs and do passive learning in each epoch. And I can guarantee you that it will work. So that was pretty cool. So broadly, I think that's kind of all I had for my talk, and we can celebrate that we've finished. You've actually lasted through this. There's one reference. Some of the work is not published yet. The last part is not published, but the first part is going to appear in ICML in that paper. And there's some future ideas that we have. But otherwise, thank you. If you happy to take questions if you have any.
So there's quite a few, there's a quite large class of where there's also like a null-based constraint. So there's a linear equality constraint. So how does that affect your?
So okay, I don't know how to do stochastic convex optimization optimally with null space constraints. Yeah, I think I don't know if this connection.
So you need to relax.
Yeah.
So you have like a bounded set.
Yeah, you always have to.
Yeah. So whatever, you have a bounded set and null space intersection there, you can still do it, right? The null space is just a set constraint, right?
Oh, that way, yeah. If it's a set,
But it's not a bounded set. Right.
No, but if it's intersecting a bounded set or something.
Yeah. So you can still do it there.
But then you just have to be able to project into that set.
Yeah, you just need to be able to do projections, right?
So the projection operator will still let the same kind of boundary.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you can write it as a convex function over a convex set, it'll work.
Yeah.
But like the error bounds don't lose anything from the projection.
You need closed convex.
No, it's going to, the error will depend on the diameter of the set that you're doing optimization over.
You need a closed,
Yeah,
convex.
it's a closed.